So this will be the first video comparing the first Percy Jackson book and the first Harry Potter book. The way this is going to work is that I'm going to compare them by using the introductions of both books, the characters of both books, the middle section or the plot section of both books, the best scene, and then the conclusion. And each section will have one winner, and by the end, one of these two books will be crowned the winner of the introduction section. For those of you that don't know, this is going to be a series which will be comparing the whole series of Percy Jackson and Harry Potter. In the description there'll be a schedule which will explain how these episodes are going to come out. In terms of the introductions of both books, this would just be the section that begins the book all the way up till the section where we understand what the characters want. To start off, we'll start with Percy Jackson. The Percy Jackson introduction is very excitable. It starts off with Percy fighting a monster. In starting off a story with something that exciting, it gets a character to understand what to expect for the rest of the book, that the rest of the book will follow this sort of excitable moments. In this introduction as well, we get introduced to the main cast, Percy, Annabeth, Grover, as well as many other side characters that will be important for the rest of the story. My only specific problem with this introduction was that I feel like there wasn't enough build-up to certain relationships that happen in the story. So for example, Percy and his mom. Percy's mom dies in the first book, first section of the story really. It's not as emotional of a scene as I would have wanted it to be. It just feels like, you know, we get introduced to his character, then we get introduced to his mom, and then his mom dies. I feel like the relationship between Percy and his mom in the beginning isn't really shown. We don't get enough time spent with that specific character, and that is the catalyst of this whole story. That death was supposed to be a lot more emotional. I personally did not feel very emotional or emotionally tinged to that death. It's just that that happened because there wasn't enough build up to that relationship. But other than that, I think the introduction is perfect. It gives us a good introduction to how the story is going to go. It gives us a good introduction to the characters, and it starts off in a way that gets you going really fast. To draw a parallel between the fast intro of Percy Jackson, Harry Potter's introduction is a lot slower. In Harry Potter's case, we're not even introduced to Harry Potter from his perspective. We're introduced through the perspective of the other wizards. He becomes a hero before we even know why he's a hero. We get some shit happen, but we don't know what happened. We just know this kid is supposed to be looked at as a hero. I actually think that's a great choice for this specific story narratively. It's a very risk-taking thing to start off from the perspective of someone else and to start off this slow in a children's book. When children's attention spans are usually slower or lower, that's why they do these. We don't actually get introduced to Harry Potter until after the first chapter. And we just get introduced to a character that's like, you know, berated and shitted on by his aunt. I actually think that's also a good decision because usually what gets people to care about characters is them going through shit. Harry is berated and we see the berating happen throughout the beginning of the story. Percy Jackson, his mom dies, and we see that happen throughout the beginning of the story. Starting off in a painful setting gets people to care more about characters. We also get introduced to the world of Harry Potter gradually. It's not just dropped on us the way most fantasy books are. We get to explore it with Harry, the same way we get to explore Percy's world with Percy. Where I think Harry Potter differs from Percy Jackson is that Harry Potter's introduction to the world is a lot more gradual than Percy Jackson's. Percy Jackson's is a lot faster, and in some cases that's a good choice. In this specific situation, it is. Between the two introductions, I personally like the Percy Jackson introduction more because in Harry Potter's, we still don't know what the goal is of Harry Potter in the first almost 150 pages. We really don't know much about what he wants, which is actually sometimes a good choice. Everything is sometimes a good choice. In this situation though, I liked Percy Jackson's introduction more. It was excitable. We like Percy Jackson from his flamboyancy, his over-the-top humor, etc., etc. Versus Harry, we don't really see too much about like his personality. We see a lot of his situation, but not much of his personality. And Percy's personality is a lot more explorable than Harry's in the introduction. We also know Percy's want in the introduction. So between the two, I think the Percy Jackson introduction was better. As far as characters go, I think between Percy and Harry, Percy is a more interesting character in the first book at least than Harry Potter. I feel like Percy is just has so much more life to him. It's almost like you're reading it from the perspective of the comic relief character. It's a good comic relief character. Percy's just hilarious. We see his inner dialogue, his inner moments. That's good. Versus Harry, who's almost, you know, monotone in some senses. And a lot of people say that he's very flat, and I happen to agree with that. I feel like Harry is just a lot more flat than most main main characters are supposed to be. Again, beyond Percy though, Annabeth has more depth than the main character casts between both. I think Annabeth's backstory of having basically been abandoned by her father, having a friend that passed away, is a lot more layered than the other characters in the story. It's a lot more layered than all the main characters, at least. In terms of Harry Potter, Ron and Hermione don't really have a history. It's just, you know, they were here. Ron's story is basically that he was poor. And yeah, that's it. He's just poor. Like, that's it to him. Hermione's history is just that basically she comes from a family of human beings. He comes from a family of normal humans. That's it. That's all we get. We don't even get, you know, a situation that happened prior to this story. Grover, on the other hand, also has a history. Grover's history is that he feels responsible for the death of Annabeth's friend. These pasts and these histories just add layers to these characters. So between the main cast, at least, I think Percy Jackson's cast was better. As far as side characters go, I think Harry Potter's is better, but the most important thing is the main characters. So Percy's characters, to me, is better than Harry's characters, at least in the first book. As for the middle section of both books, I feel like in Percy Jackson's middle area, it kind of fell short to me. A lot happens that didn't necessarily need to happen. It's like these things happen just for the sake of them happening. And that usually happens to be a thing in adventure stories. I feel like things happening for a reason is usually what gets me going. Having a purpose behind things that don't seem purposeful is what makes for something interesting. My take on the Percy Jackson middle is that anything Greek mythology related could have filled the middle section of these pages. It didn't really have much to do with the actual plot. It's just like, okay, Medusa's here, some other Greek thing is here, another Greek thing's there, and then boom, we get to this section, and then this section, and then the end. But the middle section didn't really feel purposeful. Harry Potter, on the other hand, every small detail that happened in the middle section had a use in the end. We get introduced to small details that matter. Percy bumping into Professor Quirrell in Diagon Alley, or small details, but small details that happen in sections that you don't really think this has to do with anything. But everything in the middle section had something to do in the end. And I like that a lot. I like that everything had a purpose in the Harry Potter section, in the Harry Potter story. Now, that doesn't mean I don't like filler. I personally like a good amount of filler, but filler that's good. I didn't really like the middle section for Percy Jackson, but I did like the middle section for Harry Potter. So between the two, I think Harry Potter's middle section is a lot better for me. As for the best scene between the two, I feel like the overall best scene in the introduction of both stories was the Mirror of Erised and Harry Potter. I feel like my problems in the introduction of Harry Potter was that we don't really get to see his wand. But that's not true. The wand is in front of us the whole time. We see Harry getting berated by these people that are supposed to be his family. And the Mirror of Erised chapter basically nails it on what we're supposed to think Harry wants for the whole story, not just this specific book. We get to understand that Harry wants a family. And in doing that, we get the overarching goal of Harry Potter. It's that Harry Potter just wants a family. Or he just wants people that are close to him, people that he cares about. Not only that, the scene is just really well done. The build up to it, the actual event happening, and then Dumbledore's conversation with him afterwards. All of that was just very well done. In Percy Jackson, on the other hand, I don't feel like there was a scene that stood out to me too much in the first book. The first book didn't really have too many scenes that really hit me. There were a lot of scenes that had a lot of potential, but they kind of fell flat for me. One is Percy Jackson's mom dying. I feel like that could have been done better. I also feel like the mourning section for Percy just wasn't enough for me. It's like he just cries for a day and he's like, yo, fuck it. Like, that's it. Like, it doesn't really feel like there was enough mourning for me. Along with that, another good scene that could have happened was Percy finally meeting his dad, which happens later on in the book. I feel like that just wasn't enough for me. I feel like, personally, I would have liked a more emotive section, and that just didn't happen. So between the two, Harry Potter has the best scene. Now lastly, the conclusion. Harry Potter's conclusion to me was a bit monotone in a sense. Monotone meaning it just didn't make me want to immediately be like, I need to read the next book. It just ended off in a way that was like mellow, and the story could have practically ended right there for me. If there wasn't a next book, I don't think it would have changed much. Obviously, because I know what happens in Harry Potter, you needed to have more, but I feel like the ending for the first book was just like, this could be it. That could have been the whole story. Versus Percy Jackson, we're ended on a cliffhanger. We get a twist in the end where we realize who the real villain is in Percy Jackson, why he's doing what he's doing, and what it is that he's planning on doing. It ends on a twist that makes you feel like, oh shit, like I just I just have to read the next book. And I feel like that was a more efficient ending for me between the stories. Ending on a twist or, you know, a climax almost makes you need to pick up the next book. It's not really, you know, the story could have ended right there. It's, here's a twist. If you want to know what happens, keep going. In Harry Potter, it ends, and it ends off very well, actually, with the last sentence. He feels like he finally found a home, but the story could have ended right there. The story could have just stopped right there and there wouldn't have been a problem. So I personally like the Percy Jackson ending more than the Harry Potter one. So with that being said, Harry Potter loses to Percy Jackson in the first book, Percy Jackson winning the introduction, the characters, and the conclusion, and Harry Potter winning the best scenes in the middle section. And though Percy Jackson won, that's not necessarily how the rest of the series is gonna go. It's just that between the two intro books, I like Percy Jackson's intro more than Harry Potter's introduction book. The way the schedule works, next week I'll be doing the Chamber of Secrets, the week after I'll be doing the Sea of Monsters, and the week after that I'll be doing the Prisoner of Azkaban. Because Harry Potter has 7 books and Percy Jackson has 5, it's just gonna be done like that to make it so that they match up in the end. If there's any confusion, just refer to the description where the schedules are. And that's it. Though Percy Jackson won this one, that's not necessarily how the series is going to continue.